Folks, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching. We are very fortunate today. These are the series we do with the Fancy That conversations that change our world. My name is Bashir Fancy. I'm the President CEO at BIZTEK, or Business and Technology Professional Association of Canada. And we do that every week to educate, to create awareness. And we're very fortunate because we've got Mike Picard, who's on the screen right next to me there, although he's in a different place. That's how technology is working these days for all of us with COVID-19. And Mike will tell us today, share with you, and while our idea is not to scare the heck out of people, it's not such a bad thing sometimes to actually do that so that we can get serious about this subject. We are to some extent, but maybe we don't understand that some of the risks to the extent that Mike's going to show you how the black hats operate, how the white hats try to roll, what these bad guys are doing, and how easy it is for them to get in. So Mike, welcome this morning. He's got, by the way, a pretty solid background, and I let him tell you whatever he can. He wants to tell you, but you have to trust me that he's got a pretty solid background, and we will share that with you. So welcome, Mike, this morning. I really appreciate you taking time to do this for us.
Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. And Mike, so we're looking at giving and you can, as you're answering, you want to add your background, you can. Is that one of the challenges we have found in the last few months alone, 4 months, 715% increase in ransomware. Then you turn around the other side and everybody and their brother think they are cybersecurity experts. So you got the two extremes, right, going on, where problems are getting worse by the day. People think, there's a good place they can make money and they get involved, but they don't necessarily understand the challenges. And we continue to operate the way we've done for a long time, and we don't change. And those guys out there change. Why don't you walk us through and explain, and if there's any questions I need to ask, because I think when you get on a roll, you'll be able to do the thing. If I need to, I'll ask questions, but take it away.
Yeah, sure. So I guess the first talking point would be that increase in ransomware. So 750 is just obviously a significant spike. And I think that the biggest reason behind this is really because of how streamlined the infection process has become and how low the barrier to entry is for an individual to actually participate in that sort of activity. And I mean, in just a few minutes, like I could probably set up anyone who would want to do something like that with the right infrastructure to actually carry those attacks out. And that's because that infrastructure is not something that you would actually need to set up. There's little to no setup. You would just need to be willing to essentially send some bitcoins out to the appropriate people found on either the dark web or on some sketchy forums, and basically you're good to go. And that's because what you've got here is many different tiers of skill set between black hat hackers. You've got some black hat hackers that basically they work on creating ransomware or malware in general. And I actually, if I want to start at the very root of this, you've got the malware developers. And if you look at something like, for instance, TripBot is being spread right now in the wild via exploit kits and social engineering. And it lands on people's computers, and it just basically sits there. It's what's called a loader. And this loader, its sole purpose is to load other malware, right? And so the authors of TripBot then basically partnered with another group that is running an exploit kit and partnered with another group that's running a spam network. And between those two partnerships, the authors of TripBot have been able to spread TripBot around to hundreds of thousands of systems. And then now what those malware operators can do is they can host the service, and they can basically say, hey, anyone want to load up ransomware? We'll charge you X amount of dollars per computer. And then you'll have some person that creates this ransomware. They'll sell it online somewhere, and then you'll have someone with very little to no skill set come along and purchase a license for that ransomware. This is starting to sound like a legitimate business model, right? Purchase the license for that ransomware, then go to the operators of Tripbot and say, hey, I want to buy 100,000 systems, or I want to buy 100 systems, depending on what their budget is, of course. And then they load up that ransomware, and then off you go, right? Now you can also purchase money laundering systems or services, and so you can receive your bitcoins all anonymously, and so it's really an ad hoc sort of ecosystem, and all of these actors, they don't necessarily know each other. They don't work together and plan all this out. It's all just like, hey, I'm good at this. I'm going to make malware. I'm good at infecting systems. I'm going to make a spreading service. I'm good at this. And so people are monetizing all the different cogs of this massive wheel, all on their own, and without actually, kind of communicating with each other than through, purchasing of services and goods. So it's a very strange. So that spike of ransomware. Now let's kind of dive in. Now I've given a little bit of background about it. With the way that COVID has pushed everyone into their homes, you now have squishy, soft targets that aren't on corporate networks, being the consumer's household routers and the consumer's workstation, essentially, which could be shared between mom, dad, the kids. And who knows what sort of stuff is installed on there? Maybe they're downloading torrents, playing video games, visiting a variety of different websites, and so they become very soft, squishy targets. And so now it's like, this is the perfect opportunity if you're to try to capitalize on COVID, is to basically hit them with a tried and tested business model, and that is ransomware. So it's the easiest way to monetize.
Mike,
I know I touched on a bunch of things there, but
no, but they're good. We can drill down. But we said something very interesting, and one of the things I've been saying for a few years is that they have a business plan and a budget to do all these things. The corporate world does not. They may have a budget, but there's no plan to stop. They react all the time. Would you say that's true? And can you expand?
I would definitely say that security's a lot of the fundamentals around security has been historically reactionary, right? I mean, there's more companies in a reactionary situation than in a proactive situation when they approach security. And I think that part of the reason for this is because of understanding. A lot of people think like, oh, antivirus, endpoint protection, a firewall, I'm good to go. But those all those, like, so for instance, antivirus itself, the whole premise of that is it's reactionary, and it's based off of heuristics and signatures that malware might be doing something sketchy in a certain order. For example, the behavior of some Excel file writing an exe out to disk and then executing it. Like, why would Excel ever need to do that? That's bad. Let's stop that. But that, the attacker already landed that sort of dropper on your system in the first place, right? So I think that there are companies that are taking a more proactive approach. They're engaging in penetration testing. They're actively trying to work on vulnerability management. But it's a very difficult thing to keep up, especially with some of the sizes that organizations have. Like, and I mean, like, this is going to be an extreme example, but if you look at a company like Microsoft. Microsoft has how many millions of IP addresses and how many millions of users using their systems and how many millions of applications and software that they have to maintain. How are you going to employ enough people to actually actively monitor and manage the vulnerability and risk posture across a network that large? Very difficult. And you could scale this down even into the mid-market, where you've got maybe a company revenue size around $500 million or so, They've got, employees in different locations in different geographical regions. Their attack surface is actually quite large, and they might not even realize it. And so maybe their approach to vulnerability management isn't sufficient, right? And so there's an education process that needs to happen to help these organizations get over that hurdle. And I think that cybersecurity is becoming something that is more in the spotlight these days than it used to be. So that's definitely a good move, but it's definitely not where it needs to be as of yet.
And the silos don't help, right? Because you can have a problem happen in a corporation in a few places before somebody really wakes up, because of the fact that they operate as a line of business or profit centers or whatever, and we know the left doesn't talk to the right.
Yes.
What they say, and it's not because anybody's bad, but there's also resource issues these days in terms of having the right skills. Because would you not agree that the guys who are doing all the attacking have far more skills than the people on this other side?
Yeah, well, I think that it's the way that the underground works and the way that the black hat community works is you've got some really, really smart people that are maybe in situations where they don't have opportunities to actually get legitimate jobs in cybersecurity, or it could be that those legitimate jobs simply don't pay as much as becoming a black hat hacker would. And so you've got like some really, like, think about some of the novel malware that has been written, and like let's rewind a couple of years ago, right. Even back into the Storm botnet, back the P2P botnet, one of the first P2P botnets that ever was released, and even Zeus, and these samples of malware are, I mean, like, for lack of a better term, they're works of art. They're really, really, really well thought out. And the people that created this stuff you have a small group of people that know everything from how to evade antivirus to how to gain, ring zero access or rootkit access into systems, that and having the malware sample smart enough that it can work on Windows XP all the way up, or different versions of Windows with different service packs and different languages. Creating commercial software that can be supported across all those different systems is difficult. Now try to do it, covertly with malware, and then roll your own, P2P network and all the protocols that have to go with that, and encryption, and it's like, whoa, this becomes very expensive. The skill set there is huge. So the barrier to entry is actually quite difficult at that layer. So that's the threat actor that you're competing against. And then you've got the corporate world that's trying to regulate things in a different way. Whereas, so the corporate world tries to put all of the security requirements into a box, into a checklist, into like, you can do A, B, C, and D, and now you're certified and you meet some standard, and therefore you're probably okay. And that's just like, no one in the black hat world cares about that at all. They're coming at the problem like, okay, I'm not going to face this head on. I'm going to come at it from the side, upside down. I'm going to flip this whole system around, and like, oh, there you go. Now I found one flaw, and that's all it takes, right? So it's actually, even if you had equal sets skill sets on both sides, the blue team makes one mistake, and then the hackers win. The hackers just have to find one flaw. And so I mean, it's almost I don't want to be a pessimist, but it's almost an impossible an impossible journey, because there's that one flaw, right? And so
it's a difficult task, right?
Yes.
What you're saying, and one of the things in what you just described, also you can put in the fact that those guys have the allies in the corporate world, because the report that came out 6 weeks ago said a lot of the people in the corporate world who are working in some of these areas actually are working now for the other guys, right? For the very reason you described, that things are tough, financial, some people have lost jobs, or maybe there are two people can't make ends meet. And
Yep.
this is the time when you're really vulnerable. Somebody approaches you and saying, by the way, hey, work for us. And so the bad guys, the organized criminal organizations actually have people placed in the corporate world. About that, there's no doubt.
Oh yeah.
Not, right? So you want to address that, how they can utilize people like that?
Well, I want to dig into that actually a little deeper as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, here's the one thing that people always forget is that the internet and cybersecurity specifically is a war zone. It's a war zone. It's like, if you were to picture this as a place, it's really scary. You've got nation state threat actors. You've got governments from different parts of the world pointing guns and artillery at each other, constantly shooting each other, right? Sending these cyber attacks. And then you've got like rogue gangs of cyber criminals that are, I don't know, like also just driving by people, blasting them with whatever malware they can. And then you've got some company that's, you know, waving a sign saying, hey, come to my website, I sell cookies. And it's like, what are you doing there, right? And so you gotta understand that, you know, you're in a war zone. Now I want to dive into the attack you're describing here, where you've got someone who's actually jumping into your operation, getting a job. You know, cyber criminals aren't the only people doing this. You have governments doing this stuff too, so that they can plant malware inside of, like, okay, Cisco's been popped like this. There was a very interesting vulnerability that was identified in the Cisco firmware a couple of years ago called the Sinful MAC, SYN, S-Y-N, as in the SYN packet, to synchronize during a TCP three-way handshake, and the acknowledgement packet. And so basically what happened here was some backdoor was injected into the firmware of Cisco devices, where that would allow for an attacker to create an illegal packet, a SYN packet that had all these different flags turned on that would just, this doesn't work. That's not how that part of the TCP protocol works. And you'd be able to send this packet, and it would open up a port that gives you admin access to the Cisco device. And you look at this and you go, how did this get through? How did this code get put into the source of that firmware, and then past the auditors at Cisco, pushed into production? And it's like, well, you know, if you had the right people at the right spots in the organization, you could, yeah, oh yeah, this code's fine, and push it out, right? And so who was responsible for this? We don't know. There's, you know, it's a very sophisticated backdoor. The thing hidden memory. It didn't adjust the actual size of the firmware at all. It remained the exact same as the firmware from the original version of that. I believe there was even an MD5 collision attack that was being used with some sort of checksum, so it was literally like very, very difficult to actually find this. And if it was offline, if you had taken the firmware offline, it was like hidden in the disk somewhere too. It was like bizarre. Like you would have to have, you know, some serious funding to actually craft this thing. But there's a perfect example of how even some of the biggest companies in the world are not safe to this technique, right? So it's terrifying, really. So you don't know, like, where in the supply chain. You have a phone, right? You have a smartphone. You don't know, like, what's on that phone. Have you opened it up? Do you actually, like, go through the process of reverse engineering every component of that phone? Like, no one does that, right? So you don't know, like, what could be compromised and where it could be compromised.
You're bringing up a very important point that we tend to blindly trust, right?
Yes.
Which is we don't do trust and verify. And in fact, if you look at the younger population, and this is very interesting, some of the people who run cybersecurity and whatever are the very people you will find on Facebook putting their kids' pictures about the birthdays. And I've seen it. I know some of these people.
Yeah.
It's just mind-boggling. That, do you understand what you just did? Your ID, right? Your ID can be created. All sorts of things can happen. And they do that. And so I wonder, do they understand, or is it just, I'm in security, it's just a job, right? And I do this, but you don't understand that this is the impact. As you mentioned, the government are, rogue governments, state players. Right now with COVID-19 vaccine, a race on, because I hope that they do it for humanity, but pharmaceutical companies is exactly not known to do that. They want to make
Yeah.
big bucks, right? And so the problem would be they will be raced for each of the company to get there. So as they're working on it, do people want to get their hands on exactly what the results are, what is happening in the lab? The answer is yes, right? So how are they protecting themselves, right? Just same way as yesterday? You got to be kidding me. What about the disgruntled employee who left yesterday, right? So
I think it. So there's a couple layers of controls that can be implemented to help with this stuff, right? So one of the things that I think is that people forget about is actually policy.
Right.
And policy around operations within an organization versus just cybersecurity. Like, because people think, oh, my systems are up to date, I've got endpoint protection, I'm doing penetration testing, which, everyone should be doing penetration testing as often as they possibly can, because, every day new vulnerabilities are announced and discovered.
Right.
But what are they doing to help the operational side of things? Like, people, you've got a disgruntled employee. Okay, what's your process to firing someone? Like, do you walk into their office right away and just say go home, or do you send them an email and like go pack your stuff up at the end of the day, giving that person time to actually land something into the network or go through your stuff, grab whatever, and I mean, you can really start dissecting some of these policies and procedures that an organization might have, and recognize, wait a second, we've got a blind spot over here, or we've got some risk over here, and every organization has risk. There's no organization that doesn't, and people think like, oh, that's never going to happen to me, or whatever. It's like, why would you even risk it though? Like, you have to try and harden yourself as much as possible, and like I said, every organization has risk. Even look at what happened with Edward Snowden in the NSA. The NSA, the National Security Agency, they are like arguably one of the most secure organizations in the world.
Yeah,
but
right.
Mr. Snowden was able to walk out with all sorts of data from that bunker in Hawaii or wherever he was, right? And so it's like, you have to have the right policies and procedures in place, and you need to go through the process of actually testing those policies and procedures with someone who can put on the hat that's like, okay, how evil can I be, and what's our opportunities are present.
So you touched two interesting areas, and a couple of points come to mind. One is the fact that we outsource quite a lot, right? So now when it comes to policy, which is what you touched on, which is very important, and we can deal with that. The policies in many of these companies are not dynamic. That's one problem. You have policies for a long time, they continue with the circumstances. I mean, how many of these people knew that a significant amount of their staff, or majority of the staff, would be working from home? What policy do you have? You had the policy for exception. Policy for exception was that few people might work from home, one guy will work 1 day a week or whatever. But the entire organization was not working from home. So, the policy. Now, and again, we're still talking about policy. So, you look at the policy being dynamic and practical, not just dynamic, but dynamic, practical, understood, education, awareness. Now, think about it. We have the clean desk policy, right? So, now what clean desk policy are you talking about? The guy's working from home. And as I was telling you earlier, they've got an Alexa in the background while the guy is talking confidential stuff. And Alexa is listening on through the Wi-Fi, and this guy's think they're secure. You're kidding me. But go past that. I have seen in my lifetime too many problems, and some of the thing when we went back to the root causes was the cleaning crew at night. All of them are not, they're generally good guys, but remember, because they're poor. And when you got a poor person, when you got a person struggling for money, it is easy to go after them. to convince them that I'll give you money. So, but just a couple of days ago, they said, yeah, but sure, people are now working from home. And I said, and you mean now clean desk policy doesn't happen? I said, let me ask you this thing. Do you have a cleaner come to your house to clean every 4 or 5 days or whatever it is? And he said, yes. I said, somebody comes out to look after your kids? He said, yeah. And I said, your stuff is lying like that. You don't lock up your home. You're still in the home. The things are there. Yep. They're cleaning and they're touching the thing. How long does it take for them to do this? Right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so he hadn't thought about it. He runs security in a pretty large organization. And
yeah.
It's what we're telling them is take a step back and think like this. Exactly what you said. You cannot have policy. Cybersecurity, as I always maintain, is a result of doing all these things correct, right? And what these guys are getting good at, and you're explaining quite well there, is they're doing this one part and they think, okay, now we're good. No, you got to do all the things. You got to educate.
You need layers.
It depends in depth, right? So you have to do all these different things, because there never was and never will be a silver bullet. But you went into a couple of very interesting areas. Are you able to use an example of how they do the money laundering?
So
yeah, go ahead.
There's a couple techniques that attackers are using to do this stuff, and one of them is you can use these services, mule services, where you've got basically people who've got a collection of potentially compromised accounts, bank accounts. They can then use credit cards or other different things to purchase bitcoins or purchase even goods and then sell those goods online. There's so many variety of ways that kind of fraud ties into this stuff. I think what's really interesting though about it is the availability. It's so easy. If you go on Google right now, like this is how prevalent this stuff is. You think that would be difficult to find it. If you go on Google right now and just search for like card dumps, that's how easy it is. You'll find sites where people are selling credit cards, and if you buy up these cards in bulk, you know you can then start using that person's money to go and purchase whatever you want, and then you can flip that stuff through the channels, and you know and you can do so almost anonymously, right? And there's also layers where this gets into the physical world as well. Right, so you could maybe in a carding environment or in the carding ecosystem, you have one group of people that goes and buys a press. They buy a bunch of plastic. They buy stickers. They make Visa cards, and then they just stamp them in their basement, and then they sell them out to people in their social group, and then those people go and purchase stuff at Walmart, maybe buy like 50 Xboxes or something like that, then sell them on Kijiji. And that whole world right there, it can become a service where someone then advertises it on the dark web. You want your money out, you want it clean, and they have the network in place to do it. And so like that's just a little cog, right? Going back to how this whole environment kind of works, or this whole ecosystem works, is you've got one group of people, they know their trade, they know their craft. And it's no different than when you're building a house, or you bring in an electrician to do the electrical stuff. You bring in a plumber to do the plumbing. You bring in people to do your drywall. You have all these different trades, right? And it's no different with all the verticals that happen in the underground community.
And they know the loopholes where they are because they left them behind. May not be deliberately. I've seen programmers who are working for me actually left the back door in case there was a problem they had to get in to fix something, right?
Yeah.
Which if I found people like that, I would fire them on the spot. But they basically did that. And the documentation, that was the other part. We're not actually very good at documenting the changes we've made, right? Because the programmer doesn't have time, he's under pressure, he has to do this, and he gets a change in. Now the guy is looking at it, they have no clue that somebody replicated the data. There's an organization I was talking about the other day. Here, where the data entered the system was one database. Now, the different departments that were involved to service the customer needed part of the data. It's easier to give the data dump, the whole damn thing to them. So they just replicated it. And there were 219 instances of this all over the place. And the question has to be, are you kidding me or what?
Yeah.
Why did the guy get? And so what has happened over a period of years, we have allowed access to the system to people who shouldn't have it, right? We collect a lot more data than we really, truly need.
Yeah.
And you can see what Facebook is doing with all that. And we don't even have laws to stop that, right? That's the other thing. One of the things that used to frustrate me at Visa is that our people working with law enforcement, we would arrest people and they would laugh us in the face and walk out because they have all sorts of lawyers and defenses ready because they have the bucks to do that. So you need tighter rules. We don't have that, right? Because we look at convenience as one part, which is fine. The ease of use and all that is fantastic. I understand that. Don't go completely crazy. But it's now tilted all towards convenience. That is why you go in and just look for, you Google search on something, and within 10 minutes you got about 10, or not even 10 minutes, within seconds you got 10 ads about that very product coming from different people, right?
Yeah.
Because they're selling that. They're selling. People think that they're giving out the information. No, the Facebook and likes are not. They're using your data to figure out what they're doing, and that's what they're selling to the different advertisers, saying, okay, here, right? And now you get hit with those things. And what if you didn't want to? So because they give it for free, supposedly there's nothing free anyway. And this movie that we all have seen, and I tell people, look at it, which is The Social Dilemma. It's on Netflix. And
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, you have to see it. It's about how Facebook and likes are manipulating, right? Our information, actually manipulating us. We don't even realize. And these are execs from all these companies we're talking about it, that they now feel guilty. And so they've gone up and opened the kimono of how things work. But on the other side is us, the business now. How do you deal with this? So you hit the nail on the head, that you need to understand what can potentially happen, right? And in fact, is happening. You need to educate. Will you be able to stop the thing completely? The answer is probably no. But I don't think that's what you were saying. He's like, somebody was asking me the other day, he said, so you're saying I need to do this? I said, start on the basis that the guy's going to get into your system. Now, what can you do so that he gets away? He gets zero when he goes out.
Right.
He gets absolute minimal that is no use to him, which means that the data is broken up here, there, stored in a different way, one record access by all this, so you can do audit of that. Is it blockchain? It could be, but blockchain also is being oversold, right? If you really look at it, we're getting carried away, and blockchain will solve everything. A few years ago, it was big data.
There's a lot of hype around that.
Tremendous hype. We don't even like to call it outsourcing, right? So we call it cloud. When the data is not up in the sky somewhere, it's on somebody's computer somewhere. So get serious. It is outsourcing. Call it by whatever name. So we start to think like that, and we remodel. There's a thing I'm putting together, which is about the framework of how we should deal with this, what the problems are, and it's going to come back to practical, common sense things. Then you get the technology to say, all right, these are the root causes of the problem, apply. Like what you've been doing very successfully on penetration testing and so forth, right? Using even AI. Here's an interesting thing about some of this stuff, that if you know where the problem is, you can apply, but you need to understand what's your problem first. Right?
Yes.
What data you got coming in, who's touching it, why they're touching it. We don't have that, right? And I give you an example. When we're putting PCI standards together, and I'm not going to talk about it here, what was the reason me and a couple of my colleagues and stuff, what were we working on? It stopped this fraud, the credit card, debit card fraud, which is in billions of dollars, not just Mickey Mouse money. And the companies don't understand that every dollar of fraud that they write off, assuming they're even going to show on the books, which they do. Some of them write it off as credit losses when they were actually not even credit losses, they were fraud. It's $10 of cost for every dollar of fraud. Where does it show up on your books? Doesn't show up in your books. You only read what the balance sheet and the profit and loss is telling you, the income statement is saying, here's the loss. No, it's $10, but they're buried in the different budget centers, right? Customer service, this one, that one. And since we don't do zero-based budgeting, and we don't even go back ground up, we don't understand that. So I was telling these guys that, yeah, I come originally from finance background, then I went into technology and operations governance. So I said, look, just like we used to do zero-based budgeting, you need a zero-based business plan, right? Which says, what is my business? What do I need? And it would go to what you're talking about, which would be very, very interesting. But the other thing you've identified here is just because we've successfully stopped one thing means nothing. They're going to adapt. They will adapt to, right? And they are very good at it. We are not, right? Because we
think of it like the virus and the human immune system.
Right.
Right? Like the human immune system gets stronger, but then the virus mutates. And it's just, that's exactly it. It's the cat and mouse game, right? And the black hats are the mice, and they're always trying to get around and escape from the cat, and get around antivirus, and escape from honeypots and like all these other different sort of mechanisms that might be in place to help with cybersecurity. So it's making our systems better, and it is making, like, the security nowadays, like
right.
like in the 90s and stuff, hacking was like ridiculous, right? Like it was like people had 3-character passwords. Now we have, people who have 14-character passwords. I always encourage people to have at least 14 characters for their password. In 2004-ish, it was like, yeah, 8 characters is probably okay. I think there's some places that still say 8 is fine. But,
yeah.
Like it's just getting better, but the threat adapts with that.
Correct. So what you're just saying, your point, I think, is, hey, it's a journey. There's no end game here.
There's no finish line either.
There's no finish line, isn't it? There's no end game. This is a journey. You keep doing this, they will do that. Then you have to do this, which means we need a different mindset, right? To say, by the way, when you go home saying, wow, what the heck did I not think of, right? What else can these guys do? Just like they're thinking, how are they going to get around you? You need to think, what would their next move be, and how do I protect? Which means don't take data you don't need. And if you take that, you must have it, protect it, don't duplicate it all over the place, because it becomes difficult to protect when you don't even know where the data is, right?
Exactly. And I think that it's really interesting, because you almost used to be able to enumerate over all of your blind spots, and like kind of sit back and go, okay, I've got this. Now what if this? All right, so I'm going to do this. Now that puts me here. So what if this other variable comes into play? Okay, well I'll implement this then to protect against that. But it's getting to the point where the technology stacks that we're using are becoming so abstracted, and there's so many layers and layers and layers and layers and layers that you have to have like a specialist for each layer, right? And so it's becoming almost an inhuman problem. And this is why there's been a big rise in the way that threat actors are operating, and the way that even like governments are operating with machine learning, and creating machine learning systems that can model and detect threats, and other sort of systems that can create attacks. And it's going to be very quickly turn into a battle of the bots between organizations, that basically who's got the better algorithms.
Correct.
Is going to win.
Correct. And you said something very interesting, that the machine learning and the government using it, we had different tools at Visa and elsewhere. Here's the interesting thing, that the corporate world needs to take a step back and saying, okay, how are we going to fix this problem? And what problem am I talking about? If you think about it, that I was to send you a memo saying, Mike, here, I think this is what's going on. You come back and saying, you're right on this too, but that's the problem. The problem that you think is not the case. This what's happening. So we go back. Third guy enters. Now the document started with draft 2, draft 3, draft 29, and then we say, okay, we've now we wrote it in. It's a final document. There's a final because somebody's still got a couple of things going in. Final with a date and another final updated. And now, if you really look at it, I actually went and looked at some of the stuff. The document where it started versus where you end up is many times completely different and contradicts some of the, because remember, first one, as you're putting in and people may be expressing an opinion, they may not know, right? And they're just trying to put a straw in, and then you start to get to the real stuff. Now, your machine learning is going through this to learn. What is it learning? That document or this document? Because it's going through the entire organization, and you can see why the results, when we saw some results, we were actually totally thrown off saying, what the heck happened here? And it happened because you got contradictory information and you got duplicate data, 65, 70%. If you look at, in fact, what Patrick Namoum was talking about, and he's correct, that in fact was a very similar number of 65, 70% of the data people had not looked at in the last 2 years, right? Companies. So what the heck have you got it for, right?
Right.
And it didn't matter when you had pieces of paper that you locked up and sent it to Iron Mountain to store. Now they're digitized. Therefore, you can go after it. Hard disk is cheap. The SD is cheap, right? So you keep all sorts of things online just in case. Just in case.
Yeah.
You don't write rules for exception. Rules are never written for exception. You deal with that separately. The rules are for what it should be. We have a tendency to write rules for exception. And the problem we create are all these holes. And then we got so much specialty, as you pointed out, that can you imagine? Think about it. You're working in a corporate, you're working in a bank or any large organization. You are going to get judged based on the objectives that were written for you. Now, end of October is the fiscal year end for the banks, right?
Right.
And the government is March 31st and so forth. Different places, you got different, some are annual December 31st. So now look at this. Did they know anything about the coronavirus and what was going to happen? No. The objectives were set last year. What are they going to judge you on in the next month after you finish? That's the problem we've got.
Yes.
We are not adapting to right?
Well, it actually bleeds into one of the other disadvantages that corporations have and organizations have versus the cyber criminals. The cyber criminals get to basically sit around and poke at stuff, play with technology, reverse engineer firmware, find exploits, and then go, oh, what can I do with this vulnerability I discovered in this router? Well, let me scan the internet and find out how many vulnerable devices there are. Oh, look, we've got a hit on some small company, and we've also got a hit on a big company. Wow, I'm going to capitalize on that now. But they're just kind of like organically going after stuff. Like they're not like their original goal was very different than the end result. They just kind of got there through tinkering. And versus the organizations that are like, you have this budget, you have this scope and these objectives, and you need to map out a methodology. And if you waver outside of that line, it's like they're putting on blinders, basically stopping you from seeing all the other stuff around you. Just look forward, just look straight, and like that. So that sort of approach is kind of broken, right? It's really it doesn't allow for any innovation. It doesn't allow for any adaptation. And as the environment's constantly changing, like with COVID or with even in cybersecurity, new vulnerabilities coming out every day, new strategies and techniques being created all the time by threat actors. If you're trying to predict that, well, you can't. So don't try.
Right.
And be more organic in your approach. right? Like it's just like a conversation, like we're having a conversation. It's a very organic conversation.
Correct.
We don't have an agenda. We're just kind of
No.
talking here. But look at the cool stuff that we're stumbling across through this journey, right? And that's the way that people need to approach it.
Correct. And they're all linked. Here's I won't name the organization, but I will tell you at the highest level. One is the corporate world, the other one's government. So I'm talking to them, and one of them is eager to get back into the office. Well, actually, both of them are. And I said, what is the urgency? Are you not able to do what you're doing from home? Other than the people affair and the fact that, you can go mental if you're stuck in the home and you can't go out. We understand that. But I was trying to get to the business issue. And he said, I need to get the project, finished. So I drilled a little further as to what the project was and when they set it up. And so here's the thing, Mike, this is very interesting. The project they had decided was last August, when they got the approval, because the October, as the fiscal year started, right? Here's my question. You're working from home. What you had agreed to, 11 months ago, you didn't know any of this. And the world has changed upside down and changed drastically. You are going back to do that project that you had the money because they haven't spent all the money. So I said to him, kill the project, because after he told me, I said, makes 0 sense. Absolute 0 sense, because your needs are now different. And his answer, both one corporate world and one government, is telling me that if we do that, I will not get the money for the future, which tells you we have a serious corporate culture problem. We keep doing last year's stuff, plus, minus, because if the corporate world had said, no, I'm going to empower you, you come and tell me, kill this project, right? Because it makes no sense, and I can save another $30 million. Now you tell me what is the right thing we need to do, and I'll give you the money.
Right.
We don't do that. We may do that in talking, because this is how the triangle is working. Everybody seems to know everything here. The higher you go, it's less and less. And the guy is making decision on top. He's making the least amount of decision, right? And why? Because we talk different game to them. He's interested in shareholder value. He's interested in profitability. He's interested in the guy here is doing the job. He knows the problem because he deals with the customer. When you are going to go to the third party to get what is going on, and you bring some big consulting firm to help you, who are they interviewing? They're interviewing guys at the bottom? No. They're interviewing guys here in that little thing up at the top.
Yeah.
So what are they hearing is reinforcing whatever the heck they believed in the first place. But the problem is being dealt with here. They're not part of the thing because, how many people were told you that the supermarket grocery person who was loading your shelf, who was bringing their trucks and, bringing the food to the store, or the person who was cleaning the floors at the hospital, or a nurse would become the most important person in your life in the last 6 months? Guess what? If they're not there, a lot of people would have been dead by now, right?
Yeah.
And how did we value them? No. And that's the problem. We need to understand what the heck is happening ground up so we fix this problem. That will require a culture change. They will require us stepping back and saying, no, man, the way I did it. So in the framework that I've got, which I wish I could show you, is almost done. He's saying the current state, what it should be future, and saying this is how you're going to bridge it. And the whole point was what you described here is exactly that. Here's another one on security. That I was asking this guy that, by the way, you're saying you're doing fantastic. He said, yep. I said, do you know on average guys who get into your network stay there for approximately 330 days? They don't do any damage.
Oh, yeah.
They're sitting there. So he said, why? I said, because they want to understand what the heck you're doing, who's communicating with whom, what the transactions look like, if you're using encryption, what type of encryption you're using, what password may be there. And I said, then they back out quietly. They didn't do any damage. And you say, oh, I'm very happy.
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. Okay. I just want to describe it from the perspective of the nation state threat actor.
Right.
right? And I'll trickle my way down. So in some governments, so I've had the privilege and opportunity of working closely with some governments, and in some governments they and I don't want to name any because I don't know what I'm not allowed to say here, but basically there's two approaches that you can take with hacking, and this is with operations. Let's call it
Right.
that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And
Right.
the black hats follow similar methodology. You've got two main approaches. You've got what's called like the scorched earth approach, where you kick in the front door, you go, I'm here, you encrypt the whole system, try to get me out of your system, bro. You can't stop me. You're confident in your skill set that you can just basically walk circles around the admins, and you go after. It's a smash and grab. You go after what you want. Whether that's to like encrypt the whole system, or maybe go after some specific documents. You might DDoS them on the way out so that they can't stop you, but that's a very noisy approach. And for that sort of operation, you don't really care if your tools get burned, because you're not going to be using any special sauce. You're going to just kind of go in there, smash and grab, like I said, right? And then there's the other approach. There's the I'm a ghost in your memory now, in on your CPU, in your kernel. I'm going to be very careful and very methodical. I'm going to clean every event log that I can possibly, that any ripple I make in the water, I'm going to isolate that. I'm going to and dull it out so that you can't even detect it across on the other side of the pond. And there's a couple of things I'm going to be looking for. I don't want other hackers who are on that system to know that I'm there, because I don't want them to steal my malware and reverse engineer it, right? Because if then they can weaponize it, and they can use that and maybe blame it on me, right? Because that's my malware, right? And I wrote that malware. And so, you don't want the penmanship of that malware getting back to you. So you're very careful about, I don't want other threat actors to find out that I'm there. I don't want the admin to find out that I'm there. I don't want the automated control systems to find out that I'm there. You're very stealthy. And so those are the bulk of attacks that happen. And actually, it's a very difficult number to even measure, right? Because you're saying that people there, okay, on average 100+ days, that's of the ones that were caught.
That's correct. That's yes.
There could be people on those systems for years and years and years, and you don't know. And maybe their malware is so good that even after system updates and stuff like that, they're still kicking around, right? And so,
absolutely. I'm glad you said those are the guys who got caught, because otherwise they wouldn't even have found out, right? So that's a very, very good point that you just made, because it's really, in a high level conversation, what we're having, what you're already showing is this is not a Mickey Mouse issue. This is a complex matter.
mm-hmm.
You need to understand a lot of things. You need to understand the business. You need to understand data, where the heck it's coming from, where it's going, who's accessing it, why. So you know where the external communication is occurring, right? And you have to balance ease of use versus fact that the only people who need to get to. And the reason I brought PCI into this only was for this one particular reason. What was the thing I wanted? Is that we put that standard together, put it out there, which is the AIS, DSS, Account Information Security, Data Security Standards, a visa standard that PCI Council is using. And the whole purpose was to stop the fraud, the data breaches, which is then converted into billions of dollars. What happened? It became ticking boxes. Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that what we intended? No. But is that how it's working? And the answer is yes. I've had people tell me, we are PCI compliant, blah, blah, blah. And I said, do me a favor, don't tell me that, because if I come in, I will expose you, right? Because when I look at it, I'll say, no, because what we've done is we've become, for lack of a better term, saying we've become slave to this piece of paper that says we're compliant with whatever the heck it may be. Oh, we're compliant with BIZTEK. We're compliant with Sebens. We're compliant with privacy. We're compliant with Castle. And we do that because we can tick boxes.
Yeah.
And I told him, I said, no, do me a favor. Tell me I'm not compliant, but I'm secure. Because that's all I want to hear, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, like, just because you're compliant doesn't mean you can't be hacked. A lot of, if you look at, like, you know, LinkedIn was compliant when they got hacked back in 2012.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, there's so many companies that I've gone up against because, like, I mean, this is my profession. I break into stuff, and there's so many companies that have gone up against that are compliant. But like, they have tons of vulnerabilities.
Yeah, exactly. Last question, and it could be very valuable because other than me, talk about what I think. If you were the CEO, right? So I leave the playground open for you. What would you do right now? What are the areas you would, best practices, whatever would you do? One of them, of course, is penetration testing, but what would you do to make a difference, to understand the problem and start to secure it? We know that you can't do everything in the world, but if you can bring it down, what are the areas you would look after right now? No,
so I'm trying to think, yeah, I'm trying to think from, so I think that we touched on some interesting things during this conversation. And one of them is that the operation that the Black Hats have is that they have a small group of people and they can make big splashes with that group of people. They get to stay lean and mean. And whereas the corporate world, there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape that gets in the way for people making decisions. And so I think that if corporations could work towards streamlining the decision process of things so that they can identify an issue, then go, okay, let's pivot, because you need to pivot. You can't just be like, no, this is what we decided to do and we're just going to keep, you know, you're sailing down, you're in the ocean, you've got this boat, and all of a sudden there's a storm in front of you. You know, try to go around the storm if you can. You don't need to just blast through it because that's what you said you're going to do, right? And so I think that if policies and procedures were created internally, cultural changes internally that allowed organizations to pivot easier, and I know that this is easier said than done, but that would help them dramatically tackle and fight against the beast that is the cyber criminal world. So that would be like one of the first, I guess, recommendations I could make. Now, I could go down and deep into the technical side of things as well. Of course, you know, you should be doing penetration testing. Users should be running with the least amount of privilege possible. They should only have access to the tools that they absolutely need to do their job. People shouldn't have admin privileges on systems. They shouldn't have autonomy over systems. Things should be kind of, you know, checked and double checked, but not in a way that slows you down either. Like, so it's a weird balance that you have to kind of create, and the balance doesn't need to be necessarily black and white and layered across all different things. You know, you can't fit everything inside of a box. You have to kind of use judgment and sound judgment to determine, you know, when these policies and procedures should be applied, when they should be applied. And then also don't assume that everyone's going to follow those policies and procedures as well. You need to make sure that there's regular checking and auditing, and that becomes a whole thing of itself. Cultural auditing, policies, procedure auditing, and auditing of system security. And like you mentioned earlier, you've got sometimes developers that, you know, slip in some back door. You know, you guys need to have control mechanisms in place to prevent stupid things like that from happening. I can't tell you how many IoT devices out there have hard-coded passwords because the vendor needs to update them or something, like some stupid reason, and they were lazy. They didn't come up with a good solution. They're like, well, this hard code a password and then make it so that any person can download our firmware through our update servers. And it's like, come on, guys. You're just asking for thousands of companies to be hacked because of this, right? And so I think it all comes down to really a big cultural change needs to happen, a big one. And it's not going to happen overnight either. Like, it's flipping the system upside down, and that's not easy.
It's interesting. What you just said is in one of the things that framework I was talking about, which is put the right people in, trust them and empower them. The people you know are your, so that if you empower them, they'll make a decision based on what they're facing. Instead of having to go up the rank to people up top say, I want to do this. And, then you have a problem. Because you already trained them and created this awareness saying, no, this guy will not take a chance. He will balance. It's not all or nothing, right? It's question of he'll balance it to make sure that it's one of the problems that security people created long time ago, and it's still there. You talk to some security guys, say, no, you can't do this. No, you can't do that. And so what happens? The business that goes around them to get it done, and then now you're exposed, right? Well, I keep telling them, no, your job is not to say you can't do this. Your job is to say how you can do it securely, right? How we can help you to do this thing. And yes, you can advise them saying, hey, that's a very dangerous thing to do. The payback is very little. You got a lot more to lose, walk away. But you can do this. And that also means understanding what the customer wants. No, I think is what you just said are absolutely powerful points. So, no question about it. So anybody who's listening to this, and there's been some fabulous nuggets in here that Mike has talked about, is that as you go back, I would say, listen to it again, because you'll pick up some fantastic stuff. And Mike's done some fantastic things, as you'll see his background. And he's developed he's a co-founder and CTO at BIZTEK, and he's done some really super and cool stuff on penetration testing. And you may want to seriously look at it. I will put it at the back of the thing, so that. And you got some questions here that you didn't quite understand, or you got a question. Send it in to us. We got info@biztek.org. That's info@biztek.org. And we'll have Mike respond to you. And if you want Mike to look at your environment, hey, everything is available. And you can see them. By the way, you don't see that. It's got about almost 30 screens running at the back. You got almost 30 monitors, right? Something like that.
Not 30, but like 10 or so.
But that's pretty good too. I can see it's rolling. So I
got a nice amount.
So all those guys who logged in and right, all those guys who logged in and watching, he knows who you are and where you are. No, I'm just kidding. No, but it is. He knows what he's talking about. Trust me, and he's a good, very good person. So ask your question, hear it again, so you can sink in saying, because what he's talking about, what I was asking and commenting, is not about do the stuff like yesterday. Some of the stuff from yesterday is still pretty good, but look at what your issues are, and you deal with it. You will not bring it down to zero, although that's where you should aim. It's not going to happen. But that doesn't mean you don't go make an attempt. And I think you will get there. I think it's, unless you want to add something to wrap it up, Mike, it is very good what you just talked about.
Yeah. As for closing remarks, I think that, just going back on some advice towards the audience here is, just make sure that you take security seriously, because you have issues. You just might not know it yet. So it's something that needs to be prioritized, because at the end of the day, it's the livelihood of your operation that's at risk. So
absolutely, yeah, that's fantastic, Mike. Thank you very much. My pleasure. And Mike, we will do it again for phase 2, because I think, yeah, there are areas you could drill down. You even had some charts you could show, right? Which was
definitely.
So we will try and do that, and it'll be fabulous to do that. So thank you very much for doing this, Mike. My pleasure. All the very best, and thank you, folks, for investing your time to listen to the video. If you don't pick up one thing, we think we succeeded. So all the best, folks, and let us know what interests you, and we'll keep coming back with you to help you out. Once again, Mike from BIZTEK, CTO and co-founder. So fabulous. Thanks very much, Mike, for what you do.
No problem.
All the best.